thank you all for coming to this screening and artist talk on I Can Only See Shadows. Just to give you I'm just going to give you a very quick rundown of what we're doing, and then as we've actually been requested to show the installation with very little context in its kind of originally intended format, but I promise we will have time to hear from the artists, who I will also introduce after we've seen it, and time for your questions as well. I think without further ado, we'll just go ahead and I'll ask you to direct your attention over here. I know the chairs are kind of set up facing the stage, but you're going to see the installation on this white wall to your right. And I believe it's about 20 minutes, and then we will have our conversation. Wow, thank you everyone for your attention. I just wanted to say I've had the opportunity to watch this piece a couple of times on a small scale laptop screen and through headphones, but it was a much different and more absorptive experience here in this space at full scale. Let me just say a couple of words by way of introduction, and then I really want to hand things over to the main event and also hear questions and comments from the audience. So I'm Vicky Googasian, for those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet yet. I'm a faculty member here at Georgetown, Qatar, and also one of the faculty co-coordinators of the forum. And I'm really pleased to be joined by Marissa, Benedict, and David Rueter. We're thrilled to have them with us here in Doha for the forum. They're joining us from Amsterdam, where they're currently based, though their work has been exhibited everywhere from Chicago to Brazil to Italy. And I also learned yesterday that they were even brave enough to join us here along with their little daughter, Ella, who endured her very first plane journey to come and join us at the forum. So I'm going to let them speak about their own work because, as I think you'll hear, description is a really important part of their practice. But I did want to say I think we couldn't have imagined practicing artists whose work and whose intellectual contribution was a better complement to this event. So it's a real privilege. And if you didn't know, this piece was a kind of important touchstone for us in planning the forum. My colleague Trish Kajla had, I think, seen it at the original exhibition, and it was a sort of inspiration for us in thinking about the role that arts could play in our event on global energy cultures. So I'll go ahead and let you both tell us about what we just saw.
Thank you so much, Vicky, and all the organizers and faculty, Trish and Susie, who's helped us so extensively in participating in this conference. And it's nice to know, I have no idea it was an organizing work for you all. So we have a quite limited time. We could give a very long presentation on this work. As with many artworks, there's much packed into this that we're happy to expand through discussions with all of you throughout the forum. But the very basics about the piece. So this piece was originally produced in 2016, and it was originally commissioned as part of a group exhibition around the theme of pet coke called Tracing Dirty Energy. And the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago, which commissioned this work, asked a number of artists to work with activists from the southeast side of Chicago to produce newly commissioned works through discussion with these activists about an issue that they had been fighting for a long time and actually had won legal battles against oil companies in the Calumet region over. And this issue was the fact that there was these piles of black dust called pet coke, which were blowing into the neighborhoods and creating toxic pollution and causing health issues for the residents of Calumet. So the museum had a fairly articulated political stance on this and wanted artists to respond to it and to visit the region, which was a really interesting and unusual invitation as an artist to spend a year developing a work in relation to a place. And because it was a group exhibition, there were quite a few takes about this. And ours, the more we started learning and understanding what pet coke was, which pet coke is a byproduct of the refining of really, it's dirty or heavy tar sands. So this is a really particular kind of form of energy extraction in North America. This is kind of heavy tar sands that are pulled out of the Athabascan region in Canada, slurried down in large pipelines into the Chicago region, and then held there to be refined. And that's where these piles of black dust were piling up and causing environmental hazards in Chicago. The oil goes on as it's refined into the world, globally, primarily the US. But that dust, actually, we learned, could not be burned in the United States. It was actually against US environmental regulation to do so. So that dust is actually shipped as a byproduct around the world to China, to India, to other places where there are not these regulations, and it's burned as a fuel source for further extractive processes. So this became quite interesting to us as this kind of very localized environmental discourse, but that also had this, again, transnational effect, and that dust itself provided a way, a form that we could describe and discuss that. And as part of that, and David will speak to this, we were very interested in this kind of, the byproduct is also, maybe perhaps the word externality is used within discourses about this, but it's an externality that becomes, there is no longer, it becomes the subject matter, right? It's not to the side of or unthought of, but it is integrated, and the internal and external relations perhaps get commingled in the work.
Yeah, that's all I wanted to say about that. Okay. yeah. Thanks, Marissa. That's a great summary. I think we were, this piece also came out of a point in time, I think it was 2015, 16, right? When the world was, I think the network imaginaries were being discussed a lot. The idea of what is this hyper-connected world that we're living in, both in terms of materials and climate change, but also in terms of social media. And we were noticing this kind of divide between, and I think it's a divide that comes out of colonial ideas about technology, which is between a kind of resource extractivism form of technology on one hand, on the other hand, a managerial, informational side of technology. And we were interested in how these things in practice are often very much part of the same processes and obey some of the same logics. And so for this piece, we were thinking about how dust becomes a stand-in for a form of power that becomes microscopic, almost too small to grasp or see or trace, a way that it's a kind of extension of the ideal neoliberal subject. It can traverse all boundaries. It has no limitations. It is entirely perfectly networked. It's also inexhaustible, as Reza Negarestani says in Cyclonopedia, breathe as deeply as you will, dust will never be depleted. And it's a form, but in contrast now, the people that we observe in the film, who I think we depict as fairly isolated and immobile, confined to screens. They're not free to move, perhaps. One of the sort of the sort of other side of the networked visualization is borders and impermeabilities and containment, which is not it's not visible when you think only in terms of networks and connectivity. So in the film, we look very extensively at these kinds of relationships.
Yeah. And quite directly, the 6 vignettes with the various, they're not actors, they're all artists, an anthropologist, but mostly from the art world. So there's a kind of background of this as well, and it's just shot a lot around, there's a number of art installations and projects. The Beijing Opera House is in it, some unexpected architectures of modernism and art institutions that actually feature throughout the work, which also perhaps brings into conversation the role of the art institution in this world. But the 6 vignettes were developed in relation with these artists and other colleagues. And we really wanted not only to just depict the potential forms of labor within this economy of dust, but also the small acts of resistance, or what might one do even when isolated or held or contained within this dust circulatory system.
What might survival mean, perhaps?
Yeah, survival, and even beyond survival, kind of aesthetic experiences, modes of communication, illicit or otherwise, that might traverse in unexpected ways. Since we're also thinking about the dust not only as this kind of condition that everyone is subjected to, but it's also potentially a form of communication, but a really unruly one, in which you might attempt to communicate. Dust is always interfering with things, so it has this kind of perhaps, unruly nature. We'll go with that. So there's probably more to say about the vignettes. I was going to describe very briefly for example, the forms of resistance. Perhaps we shot one with the Smart Air company in Beijing, and just the act of sitting or resting, maybe not actively participating in the economy, in fresh air or clean air. And then the one at the end was shot with the artist and designer Adam Mansour from Palestine, and he wanted to work on a vignette where he slipped in some Palestinian soil that into the kind of pet coke world that got burned and transmitted through the dust in that manner. So yeah, there's a whole world of stories in here that we do not have time to address, particularly as we have one other piece we do need to direct you all to after this. But maybe if you had any other things before we keep going.
Well, maybe let me ask, maybe I'll take moderator privilege to ask one question that is a bit related to that other piece as well. So if you all are not aware, hopefully you're aware, we have another installation of Marissa and David's work, which you can find in the Company House courtyard in the little trailer that you'll see sitting out there. And that piece, Dark Fiber, is a site-specific installation for which Marissa and David filmed new footage here in Doha to adapt the piece to this location in Doha and in Masharab. So I think I just wanted to ask you generally about the significance of place in your work. I know you've started to say a little bit about the various sites that we witnessed in this installation. But what do you think is the kind of significance for you in thinking about place in relationship to these systems that are at the heart of your work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Watching the film again after it's been a long time, I'm struck by how deeply we focus on urbanization and issues of like the extended urban apparatus, perhaps. And so I think we both move around a lot, I think. And in our films, we move around a lot. I think we've lived in many different places all over our lives. But I think that, place is something that I think is often abstracted or removed away from talk about networks and talk about global systems. But the specificities of a site are always a space where people can inhabit a space and have experiences, where the texture of the earth can be felt in some way. I think I would answer.
Yeah, and I think as visual artists, it's quite interesting because to film a place, I think in a lot of our work, as David mentioned, we're often traveling and we're arriving someplace, and we have no presumption to know about that place necessarily. But also, I think I have a belief that the act of kind of filming or drawing or many other artistic activities might allow a place to speak, also for itself, and that the actions we do, we might be staging a certain relationship with a place, but the place might also bring to it and even, be frictional with what we are engaging in as well, known or unknown. So often with our work, I actually find I learn a lot about place watching and rewatching the pieces over time. Certain places we've returned to and visited, and I have a deeper understanding each time we return of maybe, what that gesture was in relation to that place. This speaks particularly to Dark Fiber as well. It's a bit hard to arrive somewhere and immediately have a take on a place, but I think, I think this is the beauty of art, is that there's a way, not of necessarily capturing place, but of, place speaking through the lens or through the mode in which we're working. So many of our works, we do these fairly simple gestures that then actually rely a lot on place to bring its own concerns. And we hope that also speaking to others about that, we learn more. The things embedded in place that might not be even obvious to us the first time we walk across it or shoot it.
I'm really tempted to continue monopolizing the conversation here because I have many follow-up questions I would like to ask, but I also want to save some time for at least a couple questions from you all in the audience. So I believe there's folks floating around with microphones, and if you do have a question you would like to ask, please just raise your hand and get their attention, and then we just ask that if you would also introduce yourself before you pose your question, that would be great.
Hello. Hello. Can you please tell us what was the reason for having three perspectives on the same situation? Three different angles. Thank you.
The three channels. Do you want to talk Yeah, so the 3 channels, we were interested in a 3-channel film in part because of the structure of dust itself. We thought a single channel is actually, we're talking about a particle and all of these different narratives and the way the world is a bit perhaps non-linear. So we thought that the 3 channels for this video would allow this kind of non-linear structure. It all works together as it weaves, but that each one kind of gives a beat or a rhythm that produces this narrative perhaps in a slightly more open structure than a single channel typically allows one to do. So yeah, as a form of video, not exactly film, we talk about these as video installations typically, not as films. You would usually experience this in not usually. We've previously installed this in a way where there are screens even and it's spatialized and the videos are almost farther apart from each other. So you kind of walk amongst them as well. We've had hanging screens, so the air also moves the screen a bit and you feel the movement of the air and the body and the dust. So we're very interested as artists who work with sight and place as well of how the installation might also come forth typically. Yeah.
Thank you ever so much. Abigail Harrison-Moore, University of Leeds, UK. I was delighted to see that the event embeds art all the way through it. Having been the head of a school of fine art, I spend my life justifying why we matter and being asked to paint a mural of someone else's science or do a dance of it. What I was really struck with your work is, and at this scale, is thinking about how your practice helps us think about the multifaceted problems around energy history, energy future, energy present. And I wondered for yourselves as artists, doing this sort of work either as a commission or as practice that you take out into the world, what do you feel it brings to the future of energy and these really problematic questions that we're having to address here? Massive question.
No, it's a good one though. It's a very good one.
Yeah, I think when I think about futures, I think about often the future as a technological dream that often is about a specific kind of future, but it's always about a future in some ways that is about a maintenance of the present, an ongoing reiteration of the status quo. And I don't know, I mean, there are discourses about futurity that are not fully colonial, I think. But I think that in terms of what we're bringing, I think it's not a way to imagine another future, but really how to kind of, I don't know, how to exist, survive, to work within the constraints that are placed on us by these maybe crushing versions of a futurity, which is always about a kind of futurity that never arrives as promised, that is foreclosed to many, that always is about, in some ways, limiting futures. I don't know. I don't have any. I don't think we have any prescriptions.
Well, this is very particular to us as artists as well. I mean, we're very interested in artists who work in Arab futurism, Black quantum futurism. There's, I think, amazing work being done in relation to this. For our particular position, I think also based in identity, where we come from in the US as white academics practicing, we've kind of been interested in our role to talk about the historical realities and also, so like the way of being in and using acts of description to describe what is. And a lot of our work we actually try, and as this piece demonstrates, our side of it, we're working on describing the conditions or the existing structures and then inviting others in to play out that in another way. We have other works where we've used a decommissioned commodities trading pit and invited, our role is to kind of almost make sure that trading pit is, its history is present and we understand the conditions of it, but then inviting others onto the platform to speak and to even, to contest it, to act against it, to do whatever is needed, to move beyond it. So for us, we've kind of been a bit more interested in the role of aestheticization or the kind of killing something dead in some ways, which we can talk further about that. Might be controversial, but what is the role of representation, or what can aesthetics do in this?
And as artists, maybe I'll add that I think I don't think we want to think about strategy as much as practice. And what is a practice of attentiveness and attentiveness to place, and how does one see through description? How does one learn to see the world in different ways through acts of description, through not ignoring, being mindful of, but stepping to the side of the general categories and abstractions that are often forced upon the world to make it seem so immobile.
I'm going to be hanging on to this phrase, killing something dead, for a long time. I love that idea of kind of reappropriating description's kind of power to kill something in a kind of politically useful way. I know we're just a few minutes over time here, but I wonder if we have time for maybe just one more question before we start our lunch here. So is there anyone else who wants to?
Maybe we should take 1 minute to describe dark fiber.
Oh, yes, we can also do that. Any other burning questions before we hear a bit about dark fiber?
And we're here for the whole conference with a baby some of the time.
Yeah, so they can't move very fast to get away from you. All right, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
So just as Vicky mentioned, the one other installation in the Portakabin in Company House is called Dark Fiber. That piece actually was produced for the first time immediately prior to this work, so there's perhaps some resonances to the two films, or videos. And that one we've been, as Vicky mentioned, reshooting since 2014 in these various sites of its installation. And it's a very kind of simple premise of the two of us are laying a fiber optic cable to produce what seems like an illicit fiber optic network. However, place again plays a very important role, and the whole kind of process slowly unravels and becomes stranger. And so a very seemingly simple act becomes the potential for a lot, I think, to happen on it.
And the piece is anchored in a kind of a creepiness and a relentlessness that, and an idea to cast, and we appear in the piece as well, but as kind of maybe suspicious figures who are building something, and it's a calling attention to the fact that this is built, and maybe the question about who is building it.
Yeah, and the cable itself plays a large role.
Yeah, who or what is building.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did have a moment to duck into the Portakabin myself this morning, and I found it both wonderful and disturbing at the same time. So I hope everyone will find some time over the course of the next 2 days to experience that as well. And I hope also if you have further questions or a desire to converse further with Marissa and David, that you will track them down and share your thoughts with them. But right now, please join me in thanking them again for joining us here and for sharing their work with us.